there are 5 major opponents left for Luffy in the final saga, with a possibility of a surprise 6th matchup. While Blackbeard and Emu are obvious candidates, there are actually several other top-tier opponents that have been clearly set up for Luffy to fight before the series finishes. And the most exciting part is that from here on out, every remaining opponent set up for Luffy seems to be what most readers would refer to as quote-unquote Yonko level or higher. With Luffy as strong as he is at this point, capable of incapacitating an admiral with a single punch, there are now only a dozen or so characters on the entire planet that are still a true challenge for him. But luckily, Oda has spent a tremendous amount of time building up a roster of fittingly powerful final opponents to give Luffy some great battles for each arc in the final saga. In order, the 5 remaining major fights for Luffy from now through the end of One Piece seem to be Gorosei Saturn, Red Hair Shanks, Blackbeard, Akainu, and finally Emu, with one additional very possible honorable mention to be discussed at the end of the video. So today I'm going to be breaking down why each opponent is a near guaranteed matchup for Luffy, which arc Luffy will be taking on each opponent, and the narrative context of each battle. But first, I want to tell you all about an amazing deal for the perfect gift this holiday season. That's the Ridge Wallet, the sponsor for this video. What am I holding here? Well, this tiny compact thing is my new wallet. While a normal wallet is bulky and takes up a lot of space in your pocket with all the cards it has to hold, with the Ridge Wallet, all your cards fit into the same space. So it's like you're only carrying around one card. I barely even feel this in my pocket. I cannot tell you how much I love this wallet. I got the Ridge Wallet a week ago, and I no longer use my old leather wallet because the Ridge Wallet, so much more sleek, so much more compact, it really is the wallet of the future. Whenever I need an individual card, they just slide right out. They're held together by pressure, so it's easy to pull out what I need. And what's crazy is that the Ridge Wallet holds up to 12 cards, which is actually more than most normal wallets, while taking up less space. You can also get a Ridge key case, so you don't have keys dangling off a keychain taking up space in your pocket anymore either. Instead, they're all held together neatly in one little case, and you can just fan out the keys whenever you need. The Ridge Wallet and key case genuinely make me feel like I'm walking around with nothing in my pocket. It's absolutely amazing. Everyone is getting this stuff. It is absolutely going off. You can get yours today for 30% off with my link. Seriously, get yourself one, get your dad one for Christmas. Order these fast because the deal does not last long and you get literally a 99-day risk-free trial in case you don't love it and you want to go back to 1930s wallets. Shop the holiday sale by going to ridge.com/morge and get up to 30% off through December 20th. Use my link and you can enter free to win a Ridge bundle worth $4,000. So just hit the link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with the boss of Egghead Island, Gorosei Saturn. As soon as it was revealed that Saturn was definitely the final enemy of the arc, many readers speculated whether he would be defeated by Kuma, or perhaps by a surprise arrival from Dragon. However, at this point, all signs indicate it being necessary for the narrative for Luffy to be the one to get back up and play the role of Nika and liberating his friends. See, the narrative of the Egghead Island arc has been largely about the oppressive, cruel evil of the Celestial Dragons, a suffocating, all-powerful authority that everyone suffers under. For generations, people have dreamed of a hero that could one day come and liberate them from the evils of these oppressors, a dream passed down from Clap to Kuma, and then from Kuma to Bonnie. The dream of a better world that would be brought with the arrival of a warrior of liberation. For so long, they have clung on to this seemingly blind faith, hoping and praying that the day would come that this mythical Nika would actually arrive and deliver them from evil. And now, the time has, of course, come. Luffy has awakened as Nika. The final saga has begun where Luffy is set to liberate the world and bring the dawn of freedom to all innocent people suffering under the Celestial Dragon's rule. And this conflict, here in Egghead Island, is a microcosm of that. One of the premier Celestial Dragons, Gorosei Saturn, as evil and powerful as they come, has the entire crew, Vegapunk and Bonnie, captive and helpless. Kuma is coming, of course, but he is in no state to defeat someone as powerful as Saturn, who seems to be being portrayed as an even greater threat than an admiral like Kizaru. However, this is the moment that Kuma's dream can actually be realized. The very thing that he always promised his daughter. The legendary savior can actually arrive to deliver them from evil. Nika is right here. In the absolute darkest hour, the legend that Kuma and Bonnie have been waiting on can rise up and defeat the evil celestial dragon, just as they always hoped for. Symbolically, thematically, this ties together the entire setup of the Egghead Island narrative and Kuma's own story perfectly, especially as some have suggested if Kuma's final act is to relieve Luffy's exhaustion so that Luffy can stand up and defeat Saturn, thereby allowing Kuma to play a major role in being the savior for the savior. Beyond that, it simply makes sense at this point for Luffy to defeat Saturn, as Luffy pretty much always defeats the final villain of the arc, and Saturn is very clearly that. Not to mention, usually when there is a particularly significant villain in the story, Oda will have Luffy defeat one of their major subordinates beforehand, such as Mr. 3 before Crocodile, Satori before Enel, Blueno before Lucci, Caesar before Doflamingo, and in a way Doflamingo before Kaido. It just helps build momentum for the final encounter with the main boss. And at this moment in time, Saturn is acting as a sort of stand-in for Imu to do his bidding. Defeating Saturn here would wrap Egghead Island up with an extremely high-level victory for Luffy and a huge blow to the world government to fittingly kick off the final saga that is of course all about overthrowing the world government. Now after Saturn, Luffy's next major opponent is a possibly controversial choice: Shanks. To be clear, I don't believe Shanks is evil or anything like that. We've definitely seen enough to know that this is not the case. However, Shanks does not have to be evil to be an opponent for Luffy. There is a lot of setup for Shanks to be a major obstacle for Luffy to get to the One Piece. Whether this is just Shanks wanting to give Luffy a sort of trial by combat to make sure that Luffy's ready, or if there is some sort of ulterior motive of Shanks's that we don't know of yet, either way it does seem like the two will match up head to head. To begin with, as soon as Luffy reached Yonko level, that was the moment that Shanks decided that now is the time to actually try and compete for the One Piece. I know some people joke that this is because Shanks was scared to compete of the One Piece while Kaido and Big Mom were around, but the reality is that the one time that Shanks actually confronted Kaido, Kaido was the one who retreated. Shanks is certainly not scared of any character in the story, be that Yonko, Fleet Admiral, or whoever. Shanks' decision to start competing for the One Piece was solely due to Luffy finally being ready. This suggests that Shanks is interested in going up against Luffy specifically. On the other hand, Luffy has also made it clear that he views all four Yonko as his enemy, and he wants to challenge all of them before becoming Pirate King. While I'm sure Luffy will be happy to reunite with Shanks, Luffy himself has made it clear that he views Shanks as a necessary challenge towards achieving his dream. And most interestingly, the next arc in the story seems to be Elbaf, which is clearly Shanks' turf. Right now there is no major villain set up for Elbaf, and that's very likely because Shanks and his crew have already been established as the main challenge awaiting the Straw Hats there. Now, as for the context in which Luffy and the Straw Hats would go up against the red-haired pirates, the simplest possibility that I talked about years ago would be a Davy backfight. There is pretty much no reason to have even written in a Davy backfight arc into the story, as it is the only arc in One Piece that has zero long-term impact on the plot, unless this arc's inclusion was to actually establish the Davy backfight concept for a far more important arc down the line in the future. Perhaps, say, the Elbaf arc, where the Straw Hats would have to face a friendly rival in a serious competition. If I had to speculate, challenging the red-haired pirates over the final road poneglyph would be the perfect trigger for a Davy backfight, assuming that the red-haired pirates have the final one. We know that Shanks and his crew are interested in the road poneglyphs at least, as they took them from Kid's crew, so it wouldn't be surprising if they already had one in their possession. A Davy backfight would also be the perfect full circle moment going back to Luffy's final promise to Shanks that he would assemble a crew even better than Shanks's, as the Davy backfight pits the two crews against each other to see whose is better overall. Now after Shanks is a far more serious, far more personal battle for Luffy, maybe the most built-up battle in the entire story, Luffy versus Blackbeard. If Luffy has an arch-nemesis, it is Blackbeard. This matchup should be no surprise at all. Blackbeard is likely to be the final serious pirate matchup for Luffy, as Blackbeard has always been framed as the dark parallel to Luffy in the race to Pirate King, the one who represents the worst type of pirate that could ascend to the throne. I think most readers expect Blackbeard to be Luffy's final opponent when it comes to claiming the One Piece, and as such, I would guess that Blackbeard would be Luffy's major enemy in the Laugh Tale arc. I no longer believe that Blackbeard is the final villain of the series, as the story has simply built to a point where it seems like defeating the world government and the Celestial Dragons is going to be the absolute final conflict that will come after Luffy claims the One Piece. This was foreshadowed as much all the way back at Marineford, and everything that has come post-timeskip seems to only reinforce this notion, that finding the One Piece and becoming King of the Pirates is the penultimate step to the final conflict of freeing the world and bringing the dawn. In fact, even Luffy's true dream seems to be something that goes beyond the initial goal of finding the One Piece. As such, Blackbeard's battle with Luffy will likely be Luffy's final major battle against a pirate, and perhaps his final obstacle to becoming Pirate King, but not Luffy's final battle in the story overall. Rather, Luffy's opponents on the world government side will still need to be dealt with in the final war for the sake of the world. And on the world government side, there are two opponents that seem set to face Luffy. First is the Fleet Admiral of the Marines, Akainu. This is a difficult opponent to pencil in for sure, as the further we go, it becomes more clear that the Marines aren't the true enemies. It's the Celestial Dragons that control the system. However, at the same time, the Marines are a clearly deeply flawed organization themselves, who have taken the dogma of justice to dangerous extremes. While the Celestial Dragons are the root of the problem, they are certainly not the only problem. The Marines also clearly need to be torn down and rebuilt in some manner. That's why Oda is building up the importance of Sword as a vision of what the Marines should be. And at the end of the day, Akainu embodies the deepest problems of the Marines, a ruthless commitment to absolute justice that encourages acts of extreme evil in the name of good. This man has been behind a desk for so long that it's easy to forget that he is almost entirely responsible for the genocide of Ohara. Akainu is every bit as bad as the Celestial Dragons, even if he believes that he is simply doing the right thing. In my opinion, Akainu is a fundamentally important and very arguably necessary battle for Luffy, as throughout the story, Luffy has represented true justice, using his kind heart to always do the right thing wherever he has gone, regardless of what authority says he can or cannot do. And so the flawed system labels him a criminal for making his own choices. Akainu, on the other hand, represents this flawed, inflexible system. A system of absolute rules and judgments that fails to take into account independent thought and human kindness. That's why it's so fitting that Luffy will reach the final war as the king of the pirates, while Akainu will stand on the opposing side as the Fleet Admiral of the Marines. Their two roles are the perfect contrast to one another. From the very start of the story across 1100 chapters of One Piece, the constant ongoing dichotomy has been between pirates versus Marines, the never-ending conflict between these two opposing forces, the two labels that define one's place in the world, and what each symbolizes. Before the world government, before Celestial Dragons, before we learned about any of that, the simple conflict of pirates versus Marines was the foundational cornerstone of the themes of One Piece, reflecting the clash between freedom and authority, as well as between free thought and regimented justice. And this dichotomy has never stopped being relevant. That's why the final battle between the King of the Pirates and the Fleet Admiral of the Marines seems symbolically inevitable. It's interesting, as I've already talked about how defeating Saturn as one of Imu's subordinates is a good lead-in to Luffy's final conflict with Imu, but the same applies to Luffy versus Kizaru at Egghead being a good warm-up for Luffy versus Akainu. Luffy defeating Akainu's right-hand man makes it more likely to me that Luffy will one day take on Akainu himself. And of course, finally, there is the extreme personal aspect. Akainu killed Luffy's brother in front of his eyes. Akainu has made it his absolute mission to eliminate Luffy in the name of justice. And this animosity is 100% mutual. Luffy absolutely hates Akainu. Akainu is one of the only characters Luffy has ever held a deep-seated personal vendetta against, to the point that the mere mention of Akainu's name angers Luffy and makes him clutch the scar on his chest. The simple fact that this scar exists as a permanent reminder of the moment that Luffy was completely broken and had to rebuild himself from the ground up to one day challenge the world again, suggests to me that this rematch is etched into Luffy's fate. The scar alone represents Luffy's greatest failure, his fall, and for Luffy to one day be able to avenge this moment and defeat Akainu would represent Luffy having finally climbed back up and gained the strength to challenge the world, redeeming himself from the failure that has forever marked him. But Akainu is ultimately just the puppet of a far greater foe, Imu. This is fairly straightforward. The final opponent for Luffy, the final battle of the final war, is almost guaranteed to be against Imu. I've already made elaborate videos explaining why this is, but in short, the entire narrative of One Piece has clearly been heading towards overthrowing the overarching evil that has been oppressing the world for centuries, and only then can the dawn be brought back. At the center of this overarching evil is Imu, God himself. Very literally, the destiny of the D tribe, the destiny of Luffy, is to overthrow God and bring the dawn. Luffy vs. Imu seems to be the final heavyweight match that will conclude the story of One Piece. Good versus evil, the sun god versus the false god, freedom versus oppression. And after Imu is defeated, the entire system of the Celestial Dragons should fall apart, and the world should be liberated, as has been prophesied. Now, while Imu is the fifth and final of the near-guaranteed matchups for Luffy, there is one additional possibility that needs to at least be mentioned. And you all may laugh, but it just has to be brought up. Eustace Kid. That's right, make your jokes now. Isn't this the guy who isn't even in the story anymore? The biggest fraud rival in shonen manga history, who literally wasn't even close to Luffy in strength even before Luffy got all his major power-ups, and who just got one-shotted by Shanks? Well, I would definitely agree, and I've even done a video in the past breaking down how disappointing Kid is. However, there is one thing that has surprised me so far in the writing of the final saga that makes me believe that there is a chance that Oda may be baiting us with the direction of Kid so far, and that there may be a resurgence for the character soon. And that is simply that, so far, it seems like Oda has actually had a major storyline planned in the final saga for nearly every single long-running character in the story. See, when Kid was first defeated, many readers, myself included, assumed that Oda was just trimming the fat for the final saga, trying to cut down on characters and character storylines. But the further the final saga has gone on, what we've actually seen is that Oda is not holding back on going hard on side character storylines. I mean, Kobe, Garp, Aokiji, Bonnie, Kuma, hell even Kizaru and Sentomaru are turning out to have fleshed out backstories and character storylines. Can you believe that all the way back in Sabaody, Oda already had such extensive plans for how Kizaru and Sentomaru's stories would one day play into Kuma's and Vegapunk's stories, and in turn play into Bonnie's story? See, reading Egghead, I no longer feel like Oda is trying to cut down on his character storylines. If anything, so far it feels like the final saga is exploring the side characters of One Piece more than ever. And so now the possibility opens up that Kid's sudden defeat may not be an abrupt, permanent end to the character, but rather a significant planned development in his story. There is still a chance that Kid will be molded into a legitimate rival for Luffy in the future. After all, Kid was initially framed as Luffy's main rival all the way back in Sabaody, and that's the same arc that Oda planted the seeds for all these other character storylines that have now come back around in Egghead Island. And based on Oda's interviews, Kid seems to have always been part of the broader plan. Kid is also conveniently waiting at Elbaf, so maybe Luffy will have someone else to contend with that arc aside from Shanks. Yes, Kid is too weak to be a threat to Luffy right now, but Kid does have Conqueror's Haki, and so the potential for another advanced Conqueror's Haki user to awaken is technically there. So yes, I would include Kid as an honorable mention for a remaining major fight for Luffy. But regardless of how seriously you take Kid, we have 5 near-definite major Luffy battles to look forward to. Luffy vs. Saturn at Egghead, Luffy vs. Shanks at Elbaf, Luffy vs. Blackbeard, possibly during the Laugh Tale arc, hopefully Luffy vs. Akainu in the final war, and definitely Luffy vs. Imu to conclude the series. 5 heavyweight matchups left for our protagonist before he can bring the dawn of the world and bring this great epic to a close. I understand that some people may not think that there is a fitting increasing scale of difficulty in these fights, but you never know how things work out. Maybe Blackbeard gets a third fruit to become stronger soon, maybe Akainu awakens Conqueror's Haki for all we know. Not to mention, not every battle for Luffy needs to be more difficult than the last one. After all, it's not like Kizaru was a harder fight for Luffy than Kaido. All that can be said is that these 5 seem almost guaranteed to be fought by Luffy before all is said and done. Let me know which major Luffy fight you're looking forward to the most in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear a few more speculative fight possibilities for Luffy before the end of the story, then you can hear my thoughts on my weekly podcast by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.